merging or the coming together of the psychic being and the Jivatman, which is described here in Canto 6 of Book 7. Without reading the passage, without going into any of the details about what this psychic being is, for fear that it would keep us talking about this concept for quite some time. Later on, some friend suggested that I should say a little more about this psychic being. I would like to do that very briefly, because in itself it is a very vast subject, and the mother and Aurobindo both have written a great deal about it. Now, let me first look at the passage where this is described, which is on page 526. A being stood immortal in transience, deathless, dallying with momentary things, in whose wide eyes of tranquil happiness, which pity and sorrow could not abrogate, infinity turned its gaze on finite shapes, observer of the silent steps of the hours, eternity upheld the minute acts and the passing scenes of the everlasting play. We all heard of the soul, this word soul, and most writers on spiritual subjects talk about the soul. And in the English language, the soul has been used in a wide variety of meanings. Anything that is not superficial and surface for the English language is soul. Your deepest desires are also your soul. Everything that is not on the surface is soul, but soul in the spiritual literature is a technical term. It is not as it is widely used in the English language. Anything that is not on the surface, it is my soul's desire. When people say it is soul's desire, could be even a Coke, you see. So that's not the kind of soul we are talking about. It's not that kind of internalization we are talking about. We have this notion that nothing that lives can live without this spark of the divine in it. This is the fundamental assumption that we make. Even a tree has a soul. Even an animal has a soul. Of course, human beings have to have a soul. Now, if human beings have a soul, and the soul, as we always say, is immortal, the soul, as we always say, is knowledge, is bliss, is truth, then what is spiritual life? You are supposed to discover our soul. Now, why should we be discovering our soul? Why should this game of hide and seek, why should the soul come down and hide in ourselves in such a way that it is very difficult to find it? And only after a lot of tapasya one finds the soul. What has been gained? The soul has always been divine, and when you find it, it is divine. So what happens to all the lives that we have spent in looking for the soul? First, in the early, when you start your life, in the early avatars that we all go through, we do not have any idea of the soul. We live more or like an animal existence without, the many people who are much more intelligent than us live that kind of existence. For them, nothing matters. The day is well spent if their mind, their body and their vital being are properly exercised and amused. They are quite happy. They are not asking, is there anything more than that? Now, we have all gone through those lives, and some of us probably have many more lives to come. Now, what is the purpose of all this? If there is the divine already in us, The spark of the divine is already in us. Why should the divine hide underneath layers, several layers of what are called ignorance or maya or whatever it is? And then we go through this difficult task of discovering it. And when we discover it, we are supposed to have entered moksha. In other words, freedom from this cycle of birth and death. Now what has been achieved? Ultimately nothing seems to have been achieved, because God is sitting there and He is always in moksha. And a spark of His comes into us and it hides into us. We seem to spend several lives looking for it, and finally we find it and become one with God. So what is the whole purpose of this evolutionary world? What is the play? What's all this? Why are we doing what we are doing? And finding the God, is a very, very interesting concept. You can find God at any level. You don't have to be very intelligent to find God. You don't even have to be a fully evolved mental being to find God. There are people whom we call avadhuts, they find God almost at the physical level. It is possible to find God at the physical level. There are people who have found God at the vital level. There are people who have found God at the emotional level. There are people who have found God at the mental level. So God can be found in any level. Then what is the purpose of all this evolution, all this machinery that nature has developed? Does that have any meaning? If finding God is the only purpose of life, of course, as I have been saying, finding God is a most overwhelming experience, because until we find the divine, we live under the burden of uncertainty, of imperfection, of sorrow, the load of death that is threatening us all the time. Of course there is release, but the question to ask is, why the whole show? God is free, and this free God supposed to take a plunge into ignorance, and suddenly one day after many lives we suddenly find, that we are not that ignorance, we are that God, and we have merged with moksha. What did we gain? What is the gain? Now these questions do arise, and I don't think our Vedanta has really answered this question satisfactorily. This question has to be answered, and this question can only be answered when you introduce what Aurobindo has introduced, this concept called the psychic being. The psychic being, not that it doesn't exist, not that there is no reference to it in our own literature. There is reference to it. There is what is called the Chaitya Purusha. That's what we talk, when in the Indian spiritual literature there is a reference to it. But there is nobody has really dwelt on it, nobody has developed it. But in Aurobindo's yoga, there is a considerable literature which has grown around this concept of the psychic being. Now the question is then, is there a soul and is there a psychic being? Are they two different things? How different are they? Does everybody who has a soul has a psychic being? Is it possible to have a psychic being without having a soul? All these questions do arise, and people have asked these questions to Aurobindo and the mother, and they have tried to clarify these notions again and again and again. Now, for a very simple exposition, I don't want to go into the details. The simple exposition, there is the divine, the supreme divine, which manifests. Now, as long as there is a divine which is supreme, which is even beyond manifestation, we call it the transcendental divine. It is not even manifested. And the Vedas describe it as, there was a time when there was no being, nor was there non-being. All these descriptions come in the Vedas, in the Nasadiya Sukta. That simply means, how can there be a time when there is neither being nor non-being? So tell us one of these things. There must be either being or non-being. How can both be? What they mean is, it's a logical way of putting things. If you say there was being before this creation, then what was created? Being was already there. If you say there was non-being before this creation, how could being come out of non-being? All these questions arise. So the Vedic way of saying it is to say there was a time when there was neither being nor non-being, which means There was a supreme reality, but this supreme reality was unmanifest. What is called in the tantric literature as bindu, as a point. Even in modern science they say, if you go before the Big Bang, what existed was the entire universe, entire energy and mass that came here was compressed in one point, and out of this point there was this explosion and this world has come into existence. So it is that reality and now that reality wants to manifest, and as you say, Sri Aurobindo has described it in great detail that the supreme reality takes a plunge into the inconscient and so on. Now imagine a big fire which throws out sparks of various kinds, and each spark represents ultimately one being. It could be an animal, it could be a tree, it could be a human being. So behind every living being here, there is a spark of the divine, there is a soul. Nothing can exist which is not the divine. Now, this individual divine, the divine fire is a kind of impersonal divine. We call it the Brahman, which has neither he nor she. And the Upanishads talk about it as Tattvamasi, thou art that. That is neither he nor she. You can't even talk about he or she. That's an abstract thing which is beyond any kind of mental categories. That is the reality. And then when the reality manifests here, this reality spreads out as sparks in all directions, as it were, and behind each one of us there is this spark of the divine. Now this spark of the divine, Sri Aurobindo calls the Jivatman. Now this is the representative of the divine in one sense, not representative, divine itself behind your life. Now this does not come down. What comes down is an emanation of it. From this spark comes an emanation, and that emanation comes and gets into matter. And out of this matter, slowly, gradually, higher and higher forms of life grow. And this emanation of the spark of the divine, when it becomes, this formulation becomes human. In the Puranas we say, there are how many millions of yonis, they say. Before you can become a human being, you must have come through several yonis. You must have at one point, you probably were a tree, then you lower forms of animals and so on. In the sense, not you and I, but what has now taken this form, carries within us a spark of the divine, which at one time was in the lower animals, and through several centuries, millenniums and so on, we have grown, and we have now become what we call human beings. Now, in human beings, this representative of the divine that is sent, after a time, after a certain growth, takes on an individuality, which is called the psychic being. And the psychic being is hidden behind our heart, and we are hardly aware of it. And yet, in some way, it controls our lives. In very, very crucial ways, it is the psychic being that controls our life. We think that our life is controlled by our desire soul, what we call our surface being, which is made up by our education, made up by our, various environment, our personality. We decide what is good for us and we pursue that. But this is not what really directs our life. The direction for our life comes from this deep being within us, which has not yet come to the surface. And very often, the tensions in our life arise because the psychic being in us wants to go in a particular direction, but our mental being, what we call our desire soul, wants to go in another direction. And this conflict in many ways creates tensions in our lives. It can in some cases even prepare for your failures in life. You have seen many people who are very intelligent at school. Everybody thinks this chap is very smart, but such people, very often you find some of them, whatever they take up, they don't make a success of anything at all. What happens, why he's so intelligent, you talk to him, they talk to brilliant speakers, and they discuss things in the great sophistication, but put them into business, they don't proceed. Put them into a job, they don't progress. That is because the psychic being in many of these cases has taken a decision, I don't want to lead this life, but the mind has not yet, has not yet fallen in line with the decision of the psychic being. So there is this psychic being. Then why is this emanation sent? The emanation is sent because when the psychic being is formed, around it, slowly and gradually, your body, your mind vital can all form around this. And as the psychic evolves, these things can also evolve. The psychic being is essential for supramentalization. If your purpose is not supramentalization, in the sense if your purpose is not transforming the body, transforming the vital, transforming the mind, as we have been talking about, then you don't need the psychic being. But if your purpose is this transformation, this change from what I called yesterday, from the lower Prakriti to the higher Prakriti, is such a tremendous work, and you need therefore something to lead your life, and the psychic being is the best leader of this life. And therefore the mother always used to say to ashram children and so on, the one thing you need to do is bring your psychic to the front, make it the leader of your life. Once you have made it the leader of your life, you cannot really go astray. Your journey can take sometimes longer than other people's journeys, but essentially you will be along the right path, because the psychics, in its very nature, it is always turned towards the good, the true, and the beautiful. These are the three things which always attract the psychic. So if you are in the psychic, you cannot, if your psychic is the leader of your life, you are basically incapable of doing anything which is hurtful to your spiritual journey. And therefore, the essential secret is to bring the psychic to the front. What brings the psychic to the front? What brings psychic to the front is any act which advances you towards the true, good, and the beautiful. If you are capable of loving, if you are capable of compassion, if you are capable of giving, if you are capable of selflessness, every act in this direction gives a push to your psychic. If you are deceptive, if you are scheming, if you are selfish, if you want to grab things, if you are greedy, if you are jealous, each act of this kind creates a greater and greater opaqueness between you and the psychic being. So the psychic being therefore is this inner culture which is a kind of smiling soul. Let's say it's the smiling soul. The soul generally is a very serious matter, but if the psychic has a personality of its own, and it's always cheerful, always peaceful, always turned to the divine, always trusts the divine, Spiritual life is not a joke. We all talk about it's easier to talk about than really to walk the path of spirituality. Sometimes it's a very, very hard struggle. In those moments, if the psychic is awake, that never loses faith in God. Why doesn't it lose in faith in God? Because the psychic ultimately is a representative of the divine which is behind us, what is called the Jivatman. And in all spiritual sadhanas, they talk about the merging of the Hamsa with the Paramahamsa. There is this technical term they use, the Hamsa meets with the Paramahamsa. That is, the individual psychic being meets or merges with the universal Jivatman that you have behind you. And that is a great siddhi. However, that is not the end of the spiritual journey. After this, there are a number of things in Aurobindo's yoga that one has to do, but this is a capital experience. This is a very important stage in the evolution, in the yoga, and that is what is being described here. A being stood immortal in transience, deathless, dallying with momentary things, in whose wide eyes of tranquil happiness, which pity and sorrow could not abrogate, infinity turned its gaze on finite shapes. This is basically a representative of the infinite in us. It turns its gaze on finite shapes. Observer of the silent steps of the hours, eternity upheld the minute minutes acts, and the passing scenes of the everlasting play, in the mystery of its selecting will, in the divine comedy a participant, the Spirit's conscious representative, the God's delegate in our humanity. This is the God's delegate in our humanness. If there is a delegate of the divine in our humanness, in our individual formation, it is this which is called the Jivatman. Comrade of the universe, the transcendent's ray. It's a ray of the transcendent. It comes from the transcendent. It's a spark of the transcendent. She had come into the mortal body's room to play at ball with time and circumstance. It has come from infinity to play at ball, the sense what we call the leela or the play in this constricted atmosphere of time and circumstance. A joy in the world, her master movement here. The passion of the game lighted her eyes. A smile on her lips welcomed earth's bliss and grief. You see, it's only the human ego that always wants bliss, that always wants victory, that always wants success, that always wants happiness. If you ask the growing being within you, it says, I can benefit from either. I can benefit as much from bliss as from its want. I can benefit from success and also from failure. If failure, defeat, all these what we call negative things were not meant to help us, they would not have been there a part of the world. But our mind somehow always wants the positive things, always wants success. But unfortunately the world has not been constructed in such a way that you will always have good things. It is the soul's growth for its journey. Both these experiences are necessary, and therefore he says for him, for the being within us, he says, a smile on her lips welcomed earth's bliss and grief. A laugh was a return to pleasure and pain. Whether it gets pleasure or pain, what the world regards as pleasure and the world regards as pain, its reaction is always a smile or a laugh. All things she saw as a masquerade of truth, disguised in the costumes of ignorance, crossing the years to immortality. The moment-to-moment existence, the things that happen to us, the reactions that we go through, it all regards these as disguise. See, it regards this person who is acting like a child, in fact, is the divine. And ultimately he will realize he is the divine. And he doesn't take our momentary actions, failures very seriously. With great patience with ourselves and looks at all these things, as he says, disguised in the costumes of ignorance, crossing the years to immortality, all she could front with strong spirit's peace. But since she knows the toil of mind and life, as a mother feels and shares her children's lives, she puts forth a small portion of herself. This Jivatman understands the struggle that we will be required to wage in this world, and in order to help us to carry on, what does she do? She plants in us, as she says, since she knows the toil of mind and life, as a mother feels and shares her children's lives, she puts forth a small portion of herself, a being no bigger than the thumb of man, Angushtamatra Purusha. That is what the Upanishad talks about. Upanishad talks about the Purusha, whose size and shape is that of an Angushta. It's an Angushtamatra Purusha, and it says, Nihitam Guhayam. It has been deposited in the secrecy of your heart. As a result, most people think the soul must be like a locket, It must be here. But it's only to help you understand it. In the Upanishads also there comes discussion, does your body contain the soul or does your soul contain the body? You see, if you say Soul is that principle, Atman is that principle, that the Upanishad talk about. The sun and the stars and the moon and entire universe is the manifestation and the glory of the Atman. If Atman is there, if there is no Atman, the sun doesn't light up. If there is no Atman, there is no moon. If there is no Atman, the stars have no light. That which gives light to the stars, that which gives light to the sun, that which gives light to all these is Atman. So Atman is so vast, how can we say Atman is small like here? This is here as well as it occupies the entire world and it goes beyond the world. It is the transcendent real also. So that's what Aurobindo talks about, the transcendental divine, the cosmic divine and the individual divine. And it's a very strange divine also, where 2 plus 1 plus 1 doesn't make 2. 1 plus 1 makes it only 1. So the question arises, if the population of India now is, I don't know how many, 800, 900, 950 million, and if each person has a soul, how many souls are there in India? And the answer is 950 million souls. Now, where were all these souls until now? How come suddenly India's population has become 950 million? Is there some kind of go down, as Sainsbury's and other people have go downs, where there are warehouses? So a big a warehouse for souls from where, as they are required, God kind of sends, truckloads of souls, and He has been of late sending them only to India. Whereas countries like Sweden and so on are wondering for the why do we get a couple of supply trucks? That's what they are talking about. Where does it come from? You see, it is very difficult. That's why in spiritual life, after a point, all discussion is totally useless. You see, up to a point, wherever any man with experience, any man with knowledge can tell you so much. But if you expect any one individual to tell you everything so that you can understand everything, let me assure you, you will never reach that point. You will reach things only when you begin to experience things. Spirituality is a matter of experience. Soul, spirit, God, these are all matters of experience. Some people say, I don't want to do anything about God until I am fully convinced He exists. That day will never come. I am fully convinced God exists and I want to know every step, every turn, like, follow A122, then after a while you follow whatever route, M1, we went to Colchester, and so, you have to be very careful. So nobody can give you a map like this, you go like this, go like this, go like this. We all carry in our hands a small lantern. And as you walk, just 4 to 5 feet in front of you are lighted up. You see only that much. Go that distance, walk that distance, and then you will find automatically the lantern lights up the next 4 or 5 feet. Like that you go on, seeing things, understanding things. Spirituality is this. As long as you sit back in an easy chair, and I want to understand everything spiritual, I would like to read all the Upanishads and the Vedas and the Gita and all the commentaries, I don't think anybody makes much progress. Progress in spirituality can only be made through practice, through spiritual living. And that is why I always say, it's like they say, a philosopher only points to the moon, and they say, there is the moon. So where is the moon? It's like most people are asked, where is it? It's not here, it's the direction in which the finger points, and you have to look in that direction. So all this is an aid in that direction. But as I said, it's very difficult to say. There are so many people in the country, 950 million, and so how many souls are there? The answer is 1. There's only one soul. Now, how is it 950? What is this 950? Well, Aurobindo says, in spiritual life, what works is the logic of the infinite. There are 2 kinds of logic. One, he says, the logic of the finite, and the other is the logic of the infinite. And if you begin to talk about the logic of the infinite, those who are used only to the finite, they will think this is not logic, but this is magic. Therefore people say, all spiritual people, They all believe in mystical things, mysterious things. There is no solid, valid evidence. There is valid evidence, there is solid evidence, but it's of a different kind. It exists at a different level. And so I'm saying this because notions like soul, spirit, psychic being, and so on, they can really be experienced. All that one needs to know is one needs to have some idea, some little map of the whole thing, and then one has to start walking in that direction. Not wait until everything is crystal clear. And therefore he says, a being no bigger than the thumb of man, into a hidden region of the heart, to face the pang and to forget the bliss, to share the suffering and endure earth's wounds. Why is it that we are able to undergo, suffer, withstand all the suffering? Because we carry within ourselves this representative of the divine, which is in the shape of Angushtamatram, to share the suffering and endure earth's wounds and labor with the labor of the stars in the vast universe. You keep laboring all the time. And then he says, this in us laughs and weeps, suffers the stroke, exults in victory, struggles for the crown. See, it is this being in us, this representative of the Jivatman which is growing in us. It is this which goes from one life to another life. And my mother has said many things about it. One of the things she has said is, even before you die, the soul has already taken the decision when it wants to die, and when it wants to come back, and what kind of life it wants to come back in. Given, if our mind were given a chance, all of us would like to be born in Buckingham Palace maybe. There won't be much space left there, luckily it's not the mind's decision. It is the decision of your psychic being. It's quite possible, let us say for sake of just presenting it, when the time comes, the psychic being in Queen Elizabeth II may like to come back as a gardener in Buckingham Palace next life. Who knows? And who knows who and you I were in the past life, and what we are going to be in the next life. Whatever it is, the psychic being decides, and the psychic being does not evaluate a life as you and I evaluate in terms of, material success. It does talk in terms of growth, the inner growth of being, the growth of consciousness. Growth towards what? Towards the divine. Growth towards its full manifestation here. And so it is that in us, he says, which laughs and weeps. It is that which goes through all the struggle of life, suffers the stroke, exults in victory, struggles for the crown, identified with the mind and body and life. Since it has not come to the front, what happens is there is a temporary identification with the body and the mind. And when there is this identification with the body and the mind, then whatever happens to the body, whatever happens to the mind, it takes as something that is happening to its own self. It takes on itself their anguish and defeat, bleeds with fate's whips, and hangs upon the cross, yet is the unwounded and immortal self supporting the actor in the human scene. And yet, the actor in the human scene is supported by this presence. Through this, she sends us her glory and her powers, pushes to wisdom's heights through misery's gulfs. She gives us strength to do our daily task, and sympathy that partakes of others' grief, and the little strength we have to help our race. We who must fill the role of the universe, acting itself out in a slight human shape, and on our shoulders carry the struggling world. This is in us, the Godhead, small and marred. In this human portion of divinity, she sees the greatness of the soul in time. The psychic being, in fact, is the representative of the soul in time, to uplift from light to light, from power to power. And because of the presence, because of its growth, we grow up from light to light, from power to power, till on a heavenly peak it stands, a king. One day it is going to stand at the peak of our consciousness and control and command our life. In body weak, in its heart an invincible might, it climbs stumbling, held up by an unseen hand, a toiling spirit in a mortal shape. When people went to the mother, very often people have said, people would remember, I have done so many wrong things. Now if I go to the mother and stand before her, won't she know all the wrong things I have done? People used to get very tense. And mother, of course, had this, look into people's eyes very, very deeply. And, after a while, if you really have understood her, felt her deeply within, after 1 or 2 seconds, 3 seconds, you didn't know what was happening. Most of the people were crying. They didn't even see the mother. That was the experience. But the mother said, I'm not searching in you for your misdeeds or bad deeds. I'm only looking where your psychic being is, whether it can be brought to the front. What I'm seeking is this being in you, which can be brought to the front, how best to bring it to the front, how to give it a push. That's what she was looking. The divine is not concerned, with our ignorance, with our stupidity. She knows that we have ignorance and stupidity. If we had not, we would not have been candidate for this world. The very fact that we are here, we have all these things. So divine knows this. But what is important in us, what is positive in us, what the divine looks for in us, is this, the psychic being in us, which is struggling to come forward but doesn't have strength of its own to come forward, and the divine grace then pushes it and brings it forward. This is what it is, a toiling spirit in a mortal shape. This is what the divine sees when the divine looks at us. He doesn't see anything else. For us, for the divine, we are all toiling spirits in a mortal shape. Here, in this chamber of flame and light, they met. Now, Savitri's yoga, they have reached a stage where they meet, the Jivatman and the psychic being. They looked upon each other, knew themselves. They looked upon each other, immediately recognized each other, the secret deity and its human part. The calm, immortal and the struggling soul. Then with a magic transformation speed, they rushed into each other and grew one. They rushed into each other and became identified with each other, grew one. This is, this is what, when this happens, this in some sense happens in all yogas, in all culmination of spiritual sadhana. They talk about this as the Hamsa and the Paramahamsa becoming one. But in Aurobindo yoga, this is only a preliminary to the formation of what he calls a Gnostic being. The Gnostic being has to be formed, and the Gnostic being is the precursor to the descent of the supramental consciousness and so on. But let's not go into it at this point. I just wanted to read this particular passage, which I should have read yesterday. As a result of this, there are many, many letters here. In fact, I thought I would read 1 or 2 letters of the psychic being, but considering the time at our disposal, I think I leave it to you to read these letters. The best thing, to do is, if you have Aurobindo's centenary volumes, there is volume number 30 called Index and Glossary. Now there in that, in the index, you take up the word psychic being, and they have done a very good job. It's not a exhaustive job, but I must say the ashram people have done a very good job. They did it as long ago as 25 years ago when the volumes came. They'll tell you in which volume he's talking about psychic being and various aspects of psychic being. I only hope when the new set of volumes come, the index job would be even more finely finished. This is not very fine, but there is enough indication. Most of the easiest source of it, of course, is Letters on Yoga, the very first volume. There are about 15, 18 pages of letters on these questions about the psychic. As I said, many of the sadhaks did ask Sri Aurobindo and the mother questions about it, and they have answered, and they all are found there. Okay, we now move on to book 8. We have some fashion, I guess, looked at Savitri's yoga in very, very perfunctory way. I have given you some flavor of the treatment of it here, and the book 8, as you will see, contains only one canto. It is canto called the Death in the Forest. Cantos 1 and 2 are missing. But for me they are not missing because, as I said the other day, chronologically, if you take the chronological development of Savitri, cantos 1 and 2 of book 1 should in fact come here, because this describes death in the forest, and this death in the forest takes place around noon of the day on which Satyavan was to die, and the whole story follows what is called the Greek unities of time and place and action. There is a unity of time. The story, as narrated here, takes place on one day. Of course, it refers to Ashwapati's yoga, which extends over several years. It also refers to the evolution of the earth, which has taken several billion years. But Sri Aurobindo does it all through what is called the flashback technique. When he talks about Ashwapati, who is this? This is Savitri's father, and it is his prayer to the Divine Mother which is responsible for Savitri's birth, and then say what is it, how did he carry this prayer to the Divine Mother, what is the import of this prayer, and in doing this he narrates the whole history of Ashwapati's yoga, which, as we saw, takes about 250 pages, about 12,000 lines, but it's only in flashback. The actual story begins in Canto 1 of Book 1, the description of the dawn of the day on which Satyavan was to die, and then Canto 2 is a little later than the dawn, when Savitri gets up and gets busy with the household work. And then what happens? After introducing us who Savitri is, Sri Aurobindo gets busy talking about Ashwapati. And that takes several cantos, about 22 cantos it takes. Then Savitri's birth. Now since we are talking in the very opening canto, but the day on which Satyavan was to die, it means Savitri is already born. Savitri is already grown up into a girl. Savitri has already met Satyavan. Savitri has already married Satyavan. The dialogue between Savitri's mother and Narad has already taken place. Right? And then Savitri has already done the yoga that we described, the Triratra vow, that is the Mahabharata story. All this has happened. What remains now? What remains now is the noon has to come, and when noon comes, Satyavan is to die, and that is described in Canto 3. So, if you really look at it, Cantos 1 and 2 of Book 1 chronologically precede Canto 3, Death in the Forest. It's a very simple canto. That day, Savitri is the only person who knows this is the day when Satyavan was to die. Nobody knows about it. Satyavan, of course, doesn't know. Satyavan's parents don't know. But Savitri that day wants to be with Satyavan all the 24 hours. So, she goes to Satyavan's parents and takes their permission to go out into the forest with Satyavan when he goes out that day. He used to go out every day to the forest to collect fruits and roots and firewood, etc., etc. He used to go all alone. But today, she says, 1 year that I have lived with Satyavan, page 562, here on the emerald edge of the vast woods, in the iron ring of the enormous peaks, under the blue rifts of the forest sky, I have not gone into the silences of this great woodland that enrigged my thoughts with mystery, nor in its green miracles wandered, but this small clearing was my world. In other words, he says, I have been here for a whole year, but I have not gone into the forest. I have spent all my time in this little clearing where our hermitage is. And so today, he says, now has a strong desire seized all my heart to go with Satyavan, holding his hand into the life that he has loved, and touch herbs he has trod, and know the forest flowers, and hear at ease the birds in the scurrying life that starts and ceases, rich far rustle of boughs, and all the mystic whisperings of the woods. Release me now, and let my heart have rest. In other words, he says to Satyavan's parents, please permit me to go out with Satyavan into the forest today, because I have not seen the forest, although I have lived here for a whole. With the eyes that rule, I hold thee for a strong goddess who has come pitying our barren days. He already has won their affection. And he says, you are to us like a goddess. So dost thou serve even as a slave might. You have come to us not just as a daughter-in-law, but you have slaved for us, you have worked for us, you have served us like a slave. Yet thou art beyond all that thou doest. All our minds conceive, like the strong sun that serves earth from above. So you are much more than all that you have done to us. We can't really comprehend you. But if you want to go, by all means, go into the forest with Satyavan. And they go, and on page 564, about 5 lines from the top, Satyavan is busy chopping wood from a tree, but as he worked, his doom upon him came. Doom came upon him. The violent and hungry hounds of pain traveled through his body, biting as they passed, silently, and all his suffering breath besieged, strove to rend life's strong cords and be free. Now many people have done research. What could have happened to Satyavan? Aurobindo doesn't give any indication of what is it that made Satyavan feel, this is research for medical research, what is it that could have happened to him that he suddenly says, my whole body racked with pain? What kind of pain is it? How does such a pain suddenly occur? Is it, some people have said it could be sunstroke. I don't know. What I'm saying is people have used their imagination and written a lot about this also. What is it? How did he come with all this kind of pain? But the point is, he cried to Savitri. He says, "Oh Savitri, a pang cleaves through my head and breast as if the axe were piercing it and not the living branch." He says, I feel such pain throughout my body, as if somebody is using an axe and chopping me up. Such agony rends me as the tree must feel when it is sundered and must lose its life. Awhile let me lay my head upon thy lap, and guard me with thy hands from evil fate. Perhaps because thou touchest, death may pass. I just want to lie down with my head on your as he says, on your lap, so that he says, your hand may guard me from the evil fate. He has that kind of a faith in Savitri. He cried out, next page, in a clinging last despair, Savitri, Savitri, oh Savitri, lean down my soul and kiss me while I die. And even as her pallid lips pressed his failed. Losing last sweetness of response, his cheek pressed down her golden arm. She sought his mouth still with her living mouth, as if she could persuade his soul back with her kiss. Then grew aware they were no more alone. Something had come there, conscious, vast and dire. Near her she felt a silent shade immense. There was no cry of birds, no voice of beasts. A terror and an anguish filled the world, as if annihilation's mystery had taken a sensible form. Satyavan was dead before Savitri could bend down, and suddenly Savitri feels a presence there in the environment. What kind of a presence? Such a presence. Near her she felt a silent shade immense, chilling the noon with the darkness for its back. Even the noon was chilled. Indian summer, if you want to chill the noon, that presence must be a terrible presence. So there was this presence there which chilled the noon. And the presence, as a result of this, an awful hush had fallen upon the place. There was no cry of birds, and birds were terrified. There was no cry of birds, no voice of beasts. A terror and an anguish filled the world, as if annihilation's mystery had taken a sensible form. The god of death himself was present. Now, from this point, as I have been trying to tell you the difference between the original story in Mahabharata and the way Aurobindo has developed the Savitri legend, I talked about Ashwapati's yoga a great deal. I then talked about none of these things. For example, Savitri's going out, Savitri's quest for Satyavan, and all the descriptions of Aryavarta of that time. None of these is found in the original Vyasa story. It's all Aurobindo's own. Nor does Vyasa spend any time describing the meeting of Savitri and Satyavan, which Aurobindo does so delicately, with such sensitivity, and this becomes such a beautiful part of the whole epic. Their meeting, their love, all this. This is nothing of this is in the original. Vyasa has no time. Vyasa, this is one of the hundreds and hundreds of upakhyanas that he narrates in the Mahabharata. So he does it in, as I said, in 300-400 lines, where Aurobindo has 24,000 lines for this. Nor is there the discussion between Savitri's mother and Narad. That's also not part of the Mahabharata. Of course, there is this Savitri's yoga, as I said yesterday, but not yoga in this sense. Savitri's vrata, which is Triratra vrata. That's what is described when Savitri forgoes all food and all drinks and stands in one place like a tree. This is what she does in the Mahabharata, but here, as you can see, it's a regular description of Savitri's yoga, which runs at about 100 pages. After that, we have now come to book 8, which describes the death of Satyavan, which also is more or less the same in the original Mahabharata story. After that, in the original Mahabharata story, Yama says to Savitri, look, I had to come in person. I couldn't send any of my lower officials, because Satyavan is such a special soul, special person. So I had to honor him by being present personally. So I have come here to take his soul away, and he doesn't need anybody's permission. He is the god of death. So he throws his noose and captures Satyavan's soul, and then he pulls it away. Now, he is confident that Savitri won't be able to come beyond the Vaitarani river. There is supposed to be in the Puranas a river beyond which human beings can't go, only the dead can go. And so Yama is quite confident. He said, I have forgotten about Savitri, so he's going all alone. But suddenly he finds he's still hearing footsteps, looks back, and this little girl is following him. And in the beginning he is quite surprised that she had the power, strength, tapasya. This is what the Puranic stories all talk about. If you serve your husband with great devotion and so on, you get this power. I don't know why anybody wants power to go into the kingdom of death. The women want power to live in this world and not follow the god of death. Anyway, this is supposed to be her pativratya. Her great conjugal fidelity has given her this power. Yama is quite surprised and she turns back and then engages her in a conversation. First try to dissuade her and says, look, this is not a place someone like you should ever come into. This is a terrible place. This is the home of death. She says, I am lawfully wedded wife. Wherever my husband goes, I have to go. So I am here. And then he tries to dissuade her further. Savitri talks in the original story, in the Mahabharata story, of dharma, and talks in such chaste diction, in such beautiful language, that Yama is charmed, like if your granddaughter is going into a good English school and he speaks English with excellent accent, you are charmed by her. So Yama is charmed by Savitri's speech, her knowledge of dharma. He said, this chit of a girl, she knows so much about these things, and more he engages in the conversation, the more and more he is impressed. Yama is not only Yama, he is also a representative of dharma. In the Indian Puranic tradition, he is also the king of dharma, the upholder of dharma. That's all the god of death is. And so he is so pleased, in spite of his very rough and terrifying exterior, he is supposed to have a very soft heart. He is so pleased that he starts giving her boons one after the other. And Savitri accepts all those boons quietly. By the first boon she gets, Satyavan's parents, Satyavan's father gets back his eyes, Satyavan's father gets back his kingdom. Savitri's own mother, who had only one daughter, gets many sons. All these boons were given. And still her appetite for boons doesn't seem to be satisfied. She still keeps following him. Finally he doesn't know what to say, and all right, she says, I'll give you boons. You will yourself be the mother of 8 sons and I don't know how many daughters. Savitri says, very fine, but if I have to be a mother of all these children, I need Satyavan back. Yama felt he has really been captured, and so Satyavan is back. I'm just exaggerating it, but the original point is, it is Savitri's knowledge of dharma, Savitri's understanding of dharma, Savitri's politeness, her culture. It is these qualities that impress the god of death, and he agrees to release Satyavan's soul. But here, Sri Aurobindo does something which is I think so unique that of course there is nothing like this in the Mahabharata story. Here, what the god of death does, of course he also tries to scare her away. He says, this is not your place. Don't you know this is a place of death? And so he assumes a terrible form. There is all darkness and so on. But Savitri is undeterred. He just follows him. Then when he realizes that Savitri has this firm determination, will, he tries to argue with her. And in trying to argue with Savitri, the god of death takes in succession all possible philosophical positions against Sri Aurobindo's position. Because what Sri Aurobindo wants is terrestrial perfection here on earth. He wants perfection not only of the soul, but of the mind, of the vital life, of the physical life. He wants a divine body, not just a divine soul. He wants a perfected body and all this. And this is the ideal he wants, not just for one person, or I always talk about, people don't realize what Sri Aurobindo was trying to aim at. There are great siddhis. It's possible. I'll give you an example. In the folk literature, in Indian folk literature, there is a belief that the great musician Tansen, when he sang the Deepak Rag, suddenly the lights all lighted up without you didn't need any kerosene or petrol or anything, lights all lighted up. Let us now assume that this is a great siddhi. Alright. Now how many people have been able to reach that siddhi? Only Tansen has been the only example I know. I have not seen any Tansens in my life, this is only story that I have heard. Now this is also a siddhi. There is another siddhi which has the same effect but which is much more permanent and which is accessible to you and me. Which is that siddhi? This siddhi. Without singing the Deepak Rag, our host has been able to provide us with all this light. And this light is available to everybody who can afford to pay the electricity bill. And if you live in London or anywhere in the civilized world, this is available to everybody. Now this is the kind of siddhi which is accessible to human beings. Of course, it won't come to you free. In India we don't have this. Occasionally we have it and most of the time it disappears. So you need to have something, you can't get it for nothing. But the point is, the siddhi that Sri Aurobindo wants to bring is a kind of siddhi of this kind. It is not the siddhi that Tansen brought. Tansen's siddhi is only Tansen got it. So Sri Aurobindo didn't try for a siddhi which only Sri Aurobindo would get. And how many Sri Aurobindos would be there? Or how many mothers would be there? Only one Sri Aurobindo and the one mother. They came after several millennia. So if the siddhi they were aspiring for was that kind of a siddhi, which is like the siddhi of Tansen, you and I would not benefit from it at all except to say, look, our Guruji had done this wonderful thing, that's all. But what is the benefit to you and me? But what Sri Aurobindo wanted to do is to bring to this world a power, just as electricity is a power, supermind is a power in that sense, except that electricity is a physical power. And the power that he was wanted to bring was a power of the soul, the power of consciousness. This is what he wanted to bring down. And this power of the consciousness will then be available to every human being who is capable of receiving it. Now, it is this that Savitri represents. This urge, this quest is what Savitri represents. Savitri is not in fact only asking for Satyavan. Satyavan is love, fulfillment of love. That's a symbol which stands for all the kind of fulfillment that you and I have been struggling for, humanity has been struggling for millennia, and which has not yet been available to any one of us. Now, it is this ideal that Savitri represents. And it is this ideal that Sri Aurobindo worked for, lived for, and died for. It's this ideal. This is something people have to remember. Sri Aurobindo didn't perform an ideal for his moksha. He didn't go through his yoga for some siddhi for himself. For him, none of these things mattered. He said, I am not after supermind for myself. I am after it so that it becomes accessible to humanity, to mankind, to the evolutionary representative that man is going to be. Now, it is this that Savitri represents. Now, the whole world either has been saying that this ideal is impossible of achievement, or have been finding fault with Sri Aurobindo's ideal. And it's very interesting that the most radical criticism, most telling criticism of Sri Aurobindo's vision, of Sri Aurobindo's ideal, is found in Savitri. Nobody has criticized Sri Aurobindo so trenchantly, so pointedly as Sri Aurobindo himself. So Yama does this job. Yama argues from all possible philosophical positions: idealism, nihilism, pragmatism, realism, Advaita, Dvaita, Buddhism, materialism, you name it. He takes all these positions one by one and tries to dissuade Savitri. And you will find when he argues against Savitri's position, he does such a wonderful job that at times you feel, how can Savitri ever find a reply to this kind of an argument? In many cases, in live divine too, if one is not very careful and vigilant, when Sri Aurobindo is presenting Shankara's argument, and he is not in favor of Shankara, but Shankara's argument he presents so convincingly, so beautifully, that you begin to feel, is it Shankara's position or Sri Aurobindo's position? If it's Sri Aurobindo's, Shankara's position, how can he afford to, present it so tellingly, so effectively? That is the beauty of being a yogi. A yogi has a global mind. Human beings have limited minds. Human minds, however sharp they are, whether you are a QC, I don't care what you are, yours is a finite mind and it looks at truth, it looks only at one aspect of truth. But a global mind the yogi has, or a spiritual mind, is capable of looking at truth from all points of view. And Sri Aurobindo is capable of looking at any given issue, any given point, from all possible points of view, and when he expresses whatever he has seen, it is so effective that it is surprising how he could have identified himself with that position and expressed it so beautifully. And that's what you find here. Therefore, I always tell my friends, you don't have to criticize Sri Aurobindo because Sri Aurobindo has done it himself. You can't do better than that. All kinds of things, like people have said, how is it possible? It has not happened so far. How is it possible, that a consciousness like that can ever come down? None of our acharyas said that, all 100 different kinds of arguments there are. This section, this in fact we have now come to the beginning of part 3, Savitri is in 3 parts. This is a wonderful part of this poem, like other parts. I don't know which is less wonderful and more wonderful. But here, those of you who have a taste for philosophy, who have a taste for argument, all this, will find this absolutely fascinating. Now, it won't be possible for us to go into all the arguments. What I will do today and tomorrow, today we have another 15 minutes left, is give you a sample. You see, God of Death, when he goes after Savitri, trying to dissuade her, his irony is so biting, his arguments are so telling, that you wonder how Savitri will ever find a reply to any of these things. And this goes on for 100 pages. At the end of it all, when the God of Death has no more arguments left, because all the positions of professors of philosophy of all universities he has filled, Stanford and Oxford and this, that and the other, all positions. He finally says to Savitri, Savitri, I understand that you have very good replies to all the questions, queries I have raised. But arguments don't prove anything. They don't prove anything. Why did you waste our time? 100 pages, that's the human nature. If you want a new truth, you have to have power. Without power, words, arguments are just a cloud of words. The only other man who said that was Karl Marx. He said, I am not interested in philosophy. He said, in philosophy he only talks about things. I want power. It's only through power that you achieve things. And I want this power. I want to see evidence. Now you are just an ordinary human being, you are just a woman. How can you have this power? Who are you? Ultimately asks, who are you? And just at that point, Savitri, the veil before Savitri disappears, and the universal mother that Savitri really was steps to the front This is what may be called, in the context of Savitri, her Vishwarupa Darshan, or her real nature. And from her toes begins to flow a ray of light. It comes out, a flood of light comes out, and it swallows the god of death. Now god of death tries to wriggle against it, tries to call his assistants, his helpers, ignorance, darkness. Nobody can help him. But the point is, the Savitri, the Supreme Mother, does not kill, does not destroy the god of death. She only transforms the god of death. The mother is the mother not only of gods, of human beings. She is also the mother of all forces here in this world. In the Indian philosophy, if there is death, and if there is a deity presiding over this death, this must be something which God has arranged. This must be a part of God's arrangement. How can there be somebody, any power, which challenges God's authority? So this must be according to God's authority. If there is a god of death, or if there is death, the conclusion is, the consciousness in which we live now, death is necessary. If you want to be deathless, you have to change your consciousness. Don't ask for immortality with the consciousness of mortality. We are so mortal in every respect. We are so finite in every respect. We are so small in every respect. How can you ask for immortality? To make you suitable, to make you capable of receiving immortality one day, we have to go through death now. It's only through death, Aurobindo says in somewhere, that in the finite, death is the passage to immortality. And so, if death exists now, it doesn't deny God. It affirms the great plan that God has, because death is an opportunity we have to come back into life again and continue our journey, pursue our journey. What kind of a journey can you pursue? Now, very often you say, oh, when I was young, I don't know, I just could cycle 60 kilometers, 70 kilometers, 80 kilometers. Now go 10 kilometers. The body has lost its energy, we have lost our creativity, and so nature has arranged it in such a way that you come back refreshed in a new body, new set of circumstances, everything new, and mercifully no memory left of the earlier lives. Otherwise, if I remember that I had left some property in Switzerland and had grandchildren there and so on, so immediately such confusion. So it's a totally blank slate, totally blank mind, a new opportunity, wonderful opportunity, if you really look at it. Later on also, I'm saying this because when death is completely vanquished, she is only vanquished now in the context of Savitri, for Savitri and Satyavan, but not for you and me. So she says to the god of death, don't disappear yet. You still some work to do here in this world. Continue as long as there is need for you. That's what Aurobindo says. So the point I am trying to make is, this treatment that Aurobindo gives to this also gives an insight into things like, I always emphasize this, into things like pain and suffering and ignorance and death even. And so the ultimate ecstasy, as you say, if you read Aurobindo, what is the ultimate ecstasy you get? The ultimate ecstasy you get is when you realize God has made no mistakes. You have no quarrel with God. You understand exactly God. There are some things you may not understand, but in most cases you know exactly why God made the world as it is. And yet, there are two things. There are two kinds of attitude one could have. One is to find fault with God, and as young people do, God has done this wrong and that wrong and so on. Gradually, through life's experience, through all this understanding, you realize why God has done what He has done, why the organization of the world is such that nobody finds happiness in the finite things. All persons who pursue the finite come to the conclusion sooner or later that this world is anityam asukham. Then you realize this world is not meant for you to keep you happy in the sense you define happiness. We have to redefine happiness as we grow in consciousness. So growth of consciousness is what is important, and all the experiences contribute to it. Then you understand why death is there, the ignorance is there, all these things. At the same time, with reconciliation, you do not say, oh, God has done everything, there is nothing left to do. You also come to, that is the wonderful thing about life divine. What God has done is fine, but there is also responsibility for you to carry it one step beyond where it is. That the meaning of this world, you understand what the world is, but the part of that meaning is you have a job to do here in this world. Your life has a significance, your life has a meaning, and that meaning is carry this work of evolution even half a millimeter, make it progress even half a millimeter. You are all, they say in the Ramayana, all the big monkeys, came, big stones were brought and the Lanka bridge was made, and a little squirrel said, I want to help, what can I do? They said, bring a small little pebble. All that is needed is we bring the little pebble of our consciousness and put it in this. So that also helps ultimately to build this golden bridge. So something is yet to be done. And in that work, we are all invited. This is a joy of participating in this wonderful thing that Aurobindo has started. So this is the great ecstasy, great fulfillment you have if you read a book like The Life Divine. On the one hand, you understand the past. On the other, you also have a purpose for the future and realize you have a duty for this future. This is all that Aurobindo has done. And later on, as I said, when the god of death is transformed by the light that emanates from Savitri, what do you find? God of death was in fact, in his real nature, God of love. It's only in the world of ignorance that he had to pretend he is a god of. It's like your teacher. Unless you have qualified, he won't smile at you. He will put you down. Is it because you are enemy? No, he is your real friend. He is the person who really cares for you. He wants you to rise. So the god of death, when he is transformed, he shows his real form, and his real form is the god of love. And then towards the very end, there is one more very interesting episode, but I will talk about it on the last day. We have one more day, that is tomorrow. I will present to you a few passages, 2 or 3 passages maybe, just to give you the flavor of this exchange between the god of death and Savitri.